They laughed at her body, until a cowboy with muscles of steel claimed her as his own. In the town of Dusty Creek, where even time seemed to drag, a thick, rusty haze, women weighed dignity on their scales, and for Eleanor May, it always came up lighter than a feather. June of 1880 to scorched the air until it crackled, and the hot anvil in Baxter Emerson's forge became the only place where Ellie's strength mattered. She was 22. Her body was not like the others, not delicate, not graceful, not like those that appeared in fashion magazines. Her shoulders were broad from constant work with a heavy hammer, her waist strong and sturdy, and her hips full, like a woman born to work the land, not for languid strolls on the town thoroughfare. Her sun-tanned skin was the color of old parchment, and her palms were covered in deep, callous lines, maps of a hard life. Her rust-colored hair was always pulled back into a tight bun, disheveled from its perfect style even by midday, and on her face, covered in soot and a fine film of sweat, only her eyes stood out large, green, observant, in which one could sometimes see a flash of wild, unyielding will. Baxter Emerson's forge was not just a workshop, but the heart of this dusty settlement. Its clang set the rhythm of life, from dawn to dusk. The air here was not just hot, it was saturated with the smells of coal, burned metal, and earth. This smell was more familiar to Ellie, and the scent of lavender and soap she caught from the daughters of rich ranchers. She loved this place. She loved the weight of the hammer in her hand. She loved how metal yielded to her strength. Now she was working on a horseshoe for Jeremy Harper's steed, the owner of the largest ranch in the county. She needed to create a perfect shape that could withstand long gallops. It was a difficult job, requiring not only brute force, but also a delicate feel for the material. With each strike, her hammer carved out sparks, like falling stars. Each spark was a piece of her soul, her perseverance, her desire to prove she was worth something. The sound that spread through the town was sharp, relentless, a reminder of the strength and hard work that were so foreign in this place. Baxter, her mentor, a man with great whiskers and kind, tired eyes, stood nearby, his arms crossed over his chest, nodding in approval. He was one of the few who valued her not for her appearance, but for her labor. "Good girl, go." His voice was hoarse like old leather, but every word was weighty, as if forged on the same anvil as the horseshoe. "This kind of work isn't for weaklings. You know that." Ellie just nodded, not stopping so as not to lose her rhythm. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps on the wooden sidewalk broke the familiar ringing of the anvil. It wasn't just one person, but a whole group. Ellie, without lifting her head, already knew who it was. Her heart clenched, but she forced herself not to show it. Every woman in this town, every girl she had once gone to school with, was a part of this unspoken, cruel conspiracy. They came to the forge not for horseshoes, not for repairs. They came for entertainment. Today, they had brought a new victim with them. Clementine Harper, the daughter of the very rancher for whose horse Ellie was forging a horseshoe, walked in front. Her dress was sky blue, made of the finest cotton, and feathers on her hat fluttered like a proud bird's. Clementine was the embodiment of everything they despised in Ellie. Delicate, with a wasp waist, with a face that the town considered ideal. "Oh, Eleanor, are you not noticing us at all?" Her voice seemed to be made of molasses, but beneath it was steel, sharp as a knife. "I heard you're making a horseshoe for my father. I hope you don't make it as massive as you are. Otherwise, my horse won't be able to take a single step." The girls behind her, Marianne, Betsy, and Sarah, giggled. Long-nosed Betsy, known for her sharp-tongued jokes, covered her mouth with a fan that was as useless in this heat as her taunts. Ellie, gripping the hammer, felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger, but she didn't answer, continuing to strike the red-hot metal with double the force, as if trying to pound all the pain out of her soul, to forge it into a hard, indestructible core. "Don't you want to answer, Ellie?" Clementine came closer, her heels clacking on the wooden floor like a drum. "Our pastor says that strength of spirit is what matters most. I guess you've decided that the strength of your body is your strength of spirit, eh? You're so much like a man, even the pastor could get you two mixed up." The laughter grew louder, and Baxter, who had been standing to the side, frowned, his brows meeting at the bridge of his nose. He knew Ellie wouldn't answer, but it pained him to see her humiliated. "That's enough, Clementine," he boomed, his voice deeper and harsher than usual. "Leave her alone. She has work to do." But Clementine just waved her hand dismissively. "Don't people tell you that you have a man's figure?" This time, the question was asked by pale Marianne. who always hid behind Clementine. She wasn't as pretty, but her eyes, full of envy, were even more unpleasant. Or are you just working so hard to hide the fact that no one will ever want to hold you? You know, men like delicate, fragile creatures, not mountains of muscle. Ellie felt everything in her chest tighten. She imagined how those words would cut her from the inside for months to come. It wasn't just humiliation, it was a denial of her femininity, her right to happiness. She wanted to answer. She wanted to throw down the hammer and yell at them that her strength was not a curse, but her only protection. That this hammer they despised gave her independence, while they were just pretty dolls in the hands of their fathers and husbands. But she knew that any attempt to defend herself would be seen as a weakness. At that moment, she was like a wounded animal cornered, and all that was left was to endure. Clementine, seeing that Ellie was silent, walked over to the toolbox and carelessly tossed a small woman's hat onto it. It was a small, graceful hat, decorated with lace and delicate silk ribbons. "Here. You should wear this. Maybe then people won't mistake you for a hired hand," she said with a malicious grin and turned to leave, taking her entire entourage with her, leaving behind only a cloud of faint floral scent and a biting, indelible stain. When the laughter died down, a deafening silence fell over the forge. It was heavier than any hammer Ellie had ever held. Daxter came up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder, but Ellie flinched sharply, her body tense like a bowstring. She set the horseshoe down and slowly picked up the hat. It was light, airy, made for another life. She looked at it and felt not just pain, but despair. She could bend iron, but she couldn't change how people looked at her. In that moment, as her shoulders slumped and the hammer fell quietly to the ground, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe those women were right, that her body was a sentence. Ellie went to the far corner of the workshop, where it was dark, and sat on her haunches, pressing against the cold wall. She didn't cry, because her tears had long since dried. She just sat there, trying to gather the pieces of her dignity that had scattered across the dusty floor of the forge. And in this town, where her body was a subject of ridicule, she was completely alone. She heard nothing but the heavy, dull thud of her own heart. She didn't notice a rider appear at the end of the street, kicking up clouds of dust. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, dressed in a worn leather vest. His muscles seemed to bulge even through the thick fabric of his shirt. His face was hidden from the sun by the brim of his hat, but there was something in his posture, something in the way he held himself in the saddle, that made people look at him, a strength that seemed to need no approval or recognition. He was like a cliff that had risen right in the middle of a plain. His movements were unhurried but confident. He stopped his horse by the saloon, ignoring the curious stares. His gaze swept over the town, over its dusty streets, over the sparks still flying from the forge, and stopped at its open gates. But Ellie, hunched in her shadow, was too busy trying to piece her world back together. She didn't notice him or his gaze. She just sat, and in her mind, there was only one thought. She was broken. When Clementine and her friends disappeared around the corner, leaving behind only the acrid scent of powder and cheap ponds, Eleanor May was left alone in the forge. Her body, accustomed to grueling labor, suddenly felt alien. Every movement, every breath and exhale was an effort. The hammer seemed to weigh a ton, and the anvil was cold and indifferent. She sat in the corner, pressing against the rough brick wall, and Clementine's words replayed in her mind again and again. "Massive, man's figure. No one will ever want to hold you." These words were worse than any burn. They were invisible, but they left deep and healing wounds on her soul. Over the years of taunts, she had grown used to the pain, but something had broken today. For the first time in a long time, she felt not just like a strong woman, but a vulnerable, lonely girl who was desperately searching for her place in a world where she was not accepted. In the distance, beyond the walls of the forge, the town's life went on as usual. The chatter of merchants, the clatter of hooves, the creak of doors, all these sounds were part of the world that rejected her. She heard them, but she didn't want to hear them. Her attention was fixated on the hat Clementine had left. Ellie picked it up and ran her fingers over the delicate lace. She had never worn such things. Her only outfit was a work dress made of rough fabric and a leather apron. This hat was a symbol of a life she had never had and, as she felt at that moment, never would. A symbol of the femininity that had been taken from her. Daxter Emerson, noticing her state, came closer. His old, wrinkled gaze was full of sympathy. "Don't pay them any mind, Ellie," he boomed. "It's just envy. Envy of your strength. but his words could not break through the wall of despair she had built around herself. Ellie didn't believe in envy. She believed in the words that had been spoken to her whole life. Words that ate away at her confidence like rust eats away at iron. "They're right, Baxter." Her voice was quiet, almost imperceptible. "I'm not like them." She ran her fingers over her broad shoulders, feeling their power and at the same time realizing their wrongness in the eyes of others. She picked up the hammer, but it was no longer an extension of her arm, but just a heavy, lifeless piece of steel. She couldn't work anymore. No horseshoe in the world was worth the pain she was feeling. She hung her apron on the hook and, without looking at Baxter, silently left the forge. She had to walk down the main street to get to her small house on the edge of town. This walk was always a test for her. Every look, every whisper behind her back was a blow. Today, after Clementine's words, it was unbearable. She walked with her head down, trying to blend in with the dust, trying to become invisible. She felt the stares of everyone, the men sitting on porches, the women bargaining in the market, even the children who, taught by their mothers, pointed at her. It was at that moment, as she passed the Golden Prospect Saloon, that something happened that made everyone fall silent. The same stranger who had appeared in town just a few minutes ago stood on the sidewalk, his arms crossed over his chest, and watched Clementine and her friends who were just coming out of the general store. His figure was like a rock, broad shoulders, narrow hips, legs as if carved from granite. He wasn't just muscular, there was an incredible, natural strength about him. He was the embodiment of physical superiority, but his face, framed by coarse, dark hair and 3 days of stubble, was calm, almost indifferent. Clementine, who had been laughing just a minute ago, stopped. Her laughter died when she saw him. She was used to men in town looking at her with admiration, not with such a strange, appraising gaze. "Stay away, stranger," said one of the men who had been sitting on the saloon porch and had been laughing loudly at Ellie. "These ladies, they're not for you." But the stranger ignored him. His eyes, gray as a stormy sky, were fixed directly on Clementine. "Did you lose something, lady?" His voice was deep like a thunderclap, and just as calm. There was no anger in it, only an icy, unambiguous irony. "What do you mean?" Clementine frowned, her delicate face contorted with confusion. She didn't understand what was happening. "Your conscience," he replied, slowly pulling a silver dollar from his pocket and tossing it in the air. "I'd give it back if I knew where to find it. But it seems it was never here." Clementine's face showed not just confusion, but shock. She was used to compliments, to flattery, but not to such open contempt. "Who are you to talk to me like that?" she hissed, her face flushed with rage. "My father." "I don't give a damn who your father is," he interrupted her, and his voice dropped a tone, becoming more dangerous. "I saw you humiliating a woman who does work 10 times harder than you can imagine. I saw you laugh at her strength when your only strength is your father's money. I saw you throw a hat at her because your own life is so empty that you're forced to fill it with someone else's pain." His words were like a slap that affected not only Clementine but everyone standing nearby. The town froze. The people who had been laughing at Ellie a minute ago now looked at the stranger with surprise and fear. No one had ever dared to talk to Clementine like that. She was the queen of this small, dirty world. You'll pay for this," Clementine yelled, but the stranger had already turned away from her. His gaze, piercing and sharp, found Ellie, who had stopped by the saloon wall and, having raised her head, was looking at him. In her eyes there was no gratitude, only pure, genuine surprise. She couldn't believe her ears. The man slowly, without taking his eyes off Ellie, walked up to the saloon. He opened the door and paused, looking at everyone inside, as if searching for something. His gaze was long, appraising, and there was not a hint of fear in it. Then he took a step inside. Ellie stood with her back pressed against the wall, her heart pounding like a cornered horse. She was a witness to something that completely turned her perception of this town upside down. No one had ever helped her. She had always been on her own. But this stranger, who was he? Why did he do that? Why did he, a man who looked like he could break anyone, defend her, a woman who was considered wrong in this town? At that moment, she didn't feel relief. She felt curiosity, and along with it, for the first time in a long time, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of hope awakened in her soul. She watched the saloon door he had disappeared into until Baxter called out to her. He stood next to her, his eyes wide with surprise. "Who the hell was that?" he whispered, And Ellie realized she wanted to know the answer to that question too. She couldn't go into the saloon. It was indecent. It was unthinkable. But she couldn't leave either. She just stood there, breathing in the dusty air of Dusty Creek, which now seemed a little different in her soul. Amidst the pain and humiliation, something was stirring, something that was stronger than her fears. The next day, Dusty Creek was a different town. The air, usually smelling of dust and manure, was now filled with something new: tension. News of yesterday's incident at the saloon spread like wildfire. People whispered on every corner, in every shop, trying to figure out who this stranger was who had dared to challenge the Harper family, and why he had defended Eleanor May, who was despised in this town. Ellie herself spent the night without closing her eyes. She wasn't thinking about her tormentors, but about the man whose words and actions still echoed in her soul. His calm confidence, his unshakable strength that needed no approval. She had never seen anything like it. Every man she knew either gave in to the Harpers' mercy or tried to stay away from any conflict. This man was different. He was like a wild animal who had come to an old, boring zoo. His eyes, gray as a stormy sky, left a mark on her memory that no burn from hot iron could erase. Ellie couldn't go back to the forge, but she also couldn't sit at home, trapped within four walls. Her curiosity, that small spark that had ignited in her soul, pushed her outside. She put on her old hat that protected her from the sun and headed towards the main street. She knew she had to see him again, but she didn't want him to see her. She wanted to be a shadow, to watch from the sidelines. Ryder, as he had introduced himself to the saloon owner, sat at a table in a corner where the light didn't reach his face. He wasn't drinking. There was a mug of water in front of him. He calmly leaned back in his chair, watching the saloon entrance, but there was no relaxation in his posture, only focused readiness. His body was a solid, steel muscle. The thick fabric shirt was unbuttoned at the chest, and you could see the powerful, as if carved from stone, muscles rippling under his skin. There was nothing unnecessary in his movements. He didn't seek to show his strength, it was simply a part of him. Ellie, hiding behind a water wagon, watched him. She saw people entering the saloon, how their gaze fell on him, how they immediately turned away as if afraid to meet his eyes. At that moment, she saw Clementine. She was walking down the street, her face pale with rage. She wasn't alone. She was followed by her brother, a hulking lout named Caleb, and two ranch hands known for their bullying ways. They were armed. Clementine pointed to the saloon, and Caleb, with a sneer, headed for the doors. Ellie felt her heart stop. She wanted to yell for him to stop. She didn't know who this stranger was, but she knew that Caleb was a problem that could only end in blood. Caleb entered the saloon, and the silence that always hung over the place became deafening. He walked up to Ryder's table, his hand nervously twitching toward the pistol handle. "Are you the one who insulted my sister?" His voice was full of arrogance that his name and reputation gave him. Ryder slowly raised his eyes. He didn't answer. He just looked at Caleb, and in his gaze there was no fear, only indifference. This infuriated Caleb. "Are you deaf, Drifter?" he roared, and his hand moved to his Colt. Everything happened so fast that no one even had time to blink. Ryder didn't pull a weapon. He simply stood up, his movement as quick and fluid as a predator's. He grabbed Caleb's arm before he could draw his Colt and bent it, until a crunch was heard. Caleb howled in pain. With his other hand, Ryder grabbed him by the collar, lifted him off the ground like a rag doll, and with a single motion, threw him across the saloon. Caleb crashed into the bar, knocking over several chairs, and fell to the floor. His buddies, standing at the entrance, froze. There was horror in their eyes. They hadn't managed to pull their Colts. One of them, a young guy with a nervous face, raised his pistol, but Ryder took one step towards him, and that was enough. The guy, seeing his calm, deadly face, froze, his hand trembling. Ryder spoke again. "Get out, and tell your boss that I didn't come looking for trouble, that if trouble comes to me, I'll meet it." The guys, with their heads down, helped their comrade up, and the whole group, humiliated and beaten, left the saloon. Clementine stood on the street, her face as pale as a ghost's. She looked at the saloon entrance, and there was fear in her eyes. For the first time in her life, she saw that her power had no strength. Ellie, who had watched all this, felt a shiver run through her body. It wasn't a shiver of fear, but a shiver of admiration. Her heart, which had been a cold, beaten piece of ice yesterday, was now pounding like a small, restless engine. This man didn't just defend her, he showed her that there was another world. A world where strength doesn't need to be ostentatiously cruel. A world where you can be strong and calm at the same time. He didn't talk, he acted, and every action of his spoke more than 100 words. Ellie realized she couldn't hide anymore. Her place wasn't in the shadows, not in loneliness. Her place was where her strength mattered. She slowly walked to the forge. The doors were open, and Baxter was standing inside, his face thoughtful. He had seen what had happened. He had seen a man appear in his small, dirty town who had turned everything upside down. Ellie went inside, walked over to her apron, which she had so desperately left yesterday. She slowly put it on. Then she picked up her hammer. Its weight was familiar, native, comforting. But now she felt it differently. It wasn't just strength, it was her will, her determination. She walked to the anvil, on which the unfinished horseshoe for Harper still lay. She paused for a second. And then, she raised the hammer. The sound that echoed through the town was sharp, confident, and full of pride. It wasn't just the ringing of metal, it was the sound of her return. She was no longer a victim, she was a blacksmith. She was Eleanor May, and no one, ever again, would make her believe that her body was a sentence. The sparks flying from her hammer were brighter than ever. She wasn't just forging a horseshoe, she was forging her new destiny. And at that moment, looking at her, even Baxter, who had known her since childhood, saw her differently. He saw not just a strong woman, he saw the embodiment of an unyielding will. The sound of Eleanor May's hammer, echoing through Dusty Creek, was no longer a monotonous clang. It had become an anthem of her rebirth. In it was strength, stubbornness, and, most importantly, purpose. Ellie returned to work not just as a blacksmith, but as a warrior. She no longer tried to hide her body behind a work apron. Her broad shoulders, her strong hands, her full figure, all of it was not an object of ridicule, but a weapon that helped her create beauty from rough metal. People passing by the forge now stopped not to laugh, but to watch. In their gazes was not only surprise, but a dawning respite. They saw not just a woman, they saw a symbol that even in the dirtiest place, one can find their strength. The events of the last 2 days became the #1 topic. Ryder, the man from nowhere, had become a hero to those who secretly despised the Harper's power. And Ellie, the blacksmith with a man's figure, had turned her scorn into strength. Only one person was unhappy with this new atmosphere in town: Jonathan Harper, Clementine and Caleb's father. He was the owner of the largest ranch in the county, the most influential and wealthy man in Dusty Creek. He ruled not with force, like his son, but with money and power. And this drifter, this unknown man, had dared to encroach on his authority. Jonathan was an old, gray-haired man, but a cold fire still burned in his eyes. He was a predator. He was not interested in saloon brawls. He preferred to humiliate his opponents in the light of day, in front of the whole town, so his lesson would be remembered by all. He knew that simply expelling Ryder from town would be too easy. No, he had to break his spirit, and, more importantly, break the spirit of Eleanor, who, it seemed to him, was the cause of all this. He rode up to the forge on his thoroughbred stallion, dressed in an expensive suit, perfect for a hot day. This was his personal challenge. He didn't go inside, he just stood at the entrance, his face completely impassive, but a cold fire burned in his eyes. Ellie saw him and felt a wave of fear rise inside her. It was not fear of a physical threat, but fear of his power. But she didn't stop. Her hammer continued to work, creating a perfect form out of red-hot iron. She felt like a gladiator in an arena. "Eleanor," he finally spoke. His voice was even, emotionless. "I've heard you're a talented blacksmith. My son couldn't do what you do." His words were like flattery, but there was poison in them. He waited for Ellie to finish, and she finally put down the hammer. "Oh, you're talented, but you're not too smart, accepting help from a man who's made enemies by standing up for you." Ellie lifted her head. Her eyes met his, and in them there was no fear or submission, only pure, solid determination. "My job is to forge iron, Mr. Harper." Her voice was firm, like steel. "Not to choose my friends." His lips twisted into a thin smile. He felt her strength and knew he had to break it. "That's what made the game interesting." "I'm not here to discuss your friends," he said. "I'm here to issue a challenge. A challenge that will decide who in this town has a right to respect. My son told me that muscle-bound drifter is getting too big for his britches. I decided I need to see what those muscles are all about." Then he raised his hand, and from around the corner came two of his workers, pushing a heavy wooden wagon. On it lay a huge, shapeless log, wrapped in steel chains. It was so heavy that even 2 men had a hard time pushing it. At the end of the chains, a huge metal loop was welded. "That friend of yours," Harper nodded toward the saloon. "I want him to try and lift this. If he can lift it for even a minute, I'll pay him $1,000. $1,000, Eleanor. Money that could buy you a new house, a new life. But there's one condition. If he loses, he leaves town and never comes back. And you." He looked Ellie up and down. "You'll never work again. No one will take your work, because you'll be associated with losing. You'll have a choice. Be a nobody, or be a nobody with him." The whole street froze. This was not just a challenge, was a public execution. Both Ellie and Ryder were his victims. He played by his own rules, and there was no room for fair play in them. He was confident in his victory. There was no man in Dusty Creek who could lift such a log. "I know it's impossible," Harper added calmly, "but I want him to try, in front of the whole town." At that moment, Ryder came out of the saloon. He wasn't in a hurry, his movements were calm and confident. He stopped next to Harper, his gray eyes scanned the log, then moved to the old man, and then to Ellie. She saw in his gaze not just understanding, but some kind of inexplicable calculation. He already knew what Harper was up to. "What? Son, are you ready to humiliate yourself for $1,000? Harper asked with contempt. "I'm not afraid of humiliation," Ryder replied, and his voice was quiet, but everyone heard him. "A man who fears humiliation is already humiliated. You're afraid, Mr. Harper, that your power is just an illusion." Harper froze, his face contorted. He didn't expect such an answer. He was sure that Ryder would either agree or run away, but not speak to him as an equal. "I accept your challenge," Ryder said, his gaze fixed on Ellie, "but I have my own condition." He walked up to Ellie and took her hammer. Then, slowly and carefully, he examined it, ran his finger along the handle, over the steel head. He looked at her working, calloused hands, at her strong figure, and in his gaze there was no contempt, only admiration. This was the first admiration she had seen in a man's eyes, and it was worth more than any $1,000. "I'll do it, but only if this hammer is new, forged personally by her, and if she herself helps me lift this weight. Only then will I accept the challenge." His words astonished everyone. He wasn't just accepting the challenge. He was making Ellie his equal partner. He was not only putting his honor on the line, but also giving a part of hers back to her. He showed the whole town that her strength was not a mockery, but what made her his equal. He believed in her. Ellie's eyes widened. For the first time in her life, her work and her strength were publicly acknowledged. She felt her heart fill with an incredible, exhilarating resolve. She looked at Ryder, then at Harper. In her gaze was a readiness for battle. "I accept his terms," Harper said, his voice tense. He had not expected this turn of events, but he was too proud to back down. "So be it. Tomorrow at noon, in the square, we will find out who is truly strong." Harper left, but Ryder remained. He walked up to Ellie and, without a word, handed her her hammer. She took it. In his gaze, she saw not just support, but trust. He was entrusting her with his life, his honor. "We'll need to forge a new hammer," he said, his voice quiet, "just for her. The strongest one you've ever made. And we'll do it," Ellie replied. Together, she looked at him, and in her eyes there was no fear, no despair, only a pure, unyielding will. She felt alive as never before. This was not just a challenge, it was her chance to prove to everyone, and more importantly, to herself, that she was worthy. She was preparing for the most important battle of her life, and she wasn't alone. That night, the light in Eleanor's forge did not go out. She and Ryder worked, and their labor was more than just work. It was creation. A regular hammer as an extension of her hand for Ellie, but this one had to become an extension of their shared spirit. Ryder didn't just stand by, he helped. His steel muscles, about which so much had been said, were now at her disposal. He held the glowing blanks while she shaped them. He operated the bellows, fanning the fire to an incredible temperature, and she, guided by her instinct and knowledge, struck the metal. They didn't talk, but they understood each other with a single glance. Her gaze guided his strength. He saw in her eyes not only determination, but also a delicate, thoughtful knowledge of her craft. He believed in her skill like no one ever had before. They forged not just a hammer, but a work of art. Its handle was perfectly balanced, and the head was heavy and wide, capable of delivering a crushing blow yet with a shape that could catch the chains without slipping. It was a hammer forged for one single purpose, and when it was ready, Ellie carved her initials on it. It was her declaration to the world. The next morning, when the sun rose over Dusty Creek, the entire square was filled. People crowded together, sparing no money to get the best seats in the saloons and on the porches. Everyone wanted to see the spectacle that they were sure would be the greatest humiliation in the town's history. Jonathan Harper stood in the center, dressed in his most expensive suit, his face smug. Beside him, pale and nervous, stood Clementine and Caleb, expecting their honor to be restored. The chained log lay in the middle of the square, and the very sight of it drew a gasp of astonishment from the people. It was incredibly huge, its weight seemed capable of breaking even the strongest man. Then Nellie and Ryder appeared. They walked side by side, not holding hands, but there was such confidence in their stride, such harmony, that it was more eloquent than any embrace. Ellie carried the hammer they had forged, and it seemed unusually heavy. She was dressed in her usual work apron. Her face was clean, and her hair was neatly tied back, but her gaze was as sharp as steel that had just come out of the fire. Ryder walked with her, and his calmness was so palpable that it seemed to spread to everyone around them. Jonathan Harper approached them. "Well, Drifter, ready? I'm sure you'll regret your decision." "Not as much as you'll regret yours," Ryder replied calmly. "We are ready." Their challenge was simple: to lift the log and hold it for 1 full minute. It sounded like an impossible task. Ryder walked up to the log. He didn't immediately try to lift it. He carefully examined the chains, assessing their arrangement, their weaknesses, and, more importantly, their strength. Then he took the hammer that Ellie had forged, and his eyes met hers. At that moment, she understood. This hammer was not just a tool, but the key to victory. Ryder slid the hammer under the chains, and thanks to its special shape, it hooked them perfectly. He used the hammer as a lever, and then, with incredible effort, he began to pull. His muscles tensed, steel knots rippled under his shirt, every vein on his hands bulged. His face tensed, but he didn't make a sound. The log rose, but only a few inches. It was too heavy. And then Ellie stepped forward. She walked up to the log, grabbed it with both hands, and, with incredible strength, helped Ryder. She didn't lift it by herself, but her strength, her persistence, and her knowledge of how to distribute the weight did the trick. They were like two gears in a single mechanism, working in perfect sync. Slowly, inch by inch, the log rose. Shock was reflected on the faces of the people. They had never seen such a sight. They saw how a man and a woman, whom they had despised, worked together as a single whole, overcoming what seemed impossible. On Clementine's face there was not just disappointment, but horror. She saw how her father, her brother, her power, all of it was melting before her eyes. A minute was an eternity. Every second seemed like a year. Ryder's face was covered in sweat. His hands were trembling, but he held on. And so did Ellie. Her face was focused. Her strength was incredible. Finally, when the last second passed, they lowered the log. The sound of its fall was like a thunderclap. The crowd stood still. Then applause erupted. First hesitant, and then louder and louder. It was not just a triumph of strength, it was a triumph of spirit. Ryder and Ellie looked at each other, their faces tired, but a victorious smile shone on them. They did it. They won. Jonathan Harper stood like a statue. His face was pale. His eyes contained nothing but emptiness. He was defeated. He had lost everything. His authority, his power, his reputation. He walked up to Ryder, took a wallet out of his pocket, and, without a word, threw $1,000 on the ground. He didn't even look at Ellie. He just turned and walked away, his back bent under the weight of his defeat. Ryder picked up the money and, without looking at it, held it out to Ellie. She didn't take it. "It's our money," she said. "No," he replied, and there was respect in his voice. "It's your money. It's your hammer, your work, your strength." Ellie took the money, and holding it in her hands, looked at Ryder. In her eyes was gratitude, but also something more. Admiration. She had witnessed a miracle. A man who not only believed in her strength, but also helped her show that strength to the whole town. At that moment, Ellie understood that she was no longer broken. Her strength was not a curse, but a gift. And this gift had helped her win. And the people who had laughed at her just yesterday were now looking at her with open admiration. Her triumph was complete. And it was just the beginning. The victory in the square changed everything. Dusty Creek, which yesterday was a place of dull, biting contempt, today turned into a hero town. People who had recently shunned Ellie now came up to her, extending their hands to shake hers, their eyes filled with genuine admiration. The women who had laughed at her now looked down in embarrassment, and some even tried to apologize, although their apologies were hollow. But it didn't matter to Ellie. She didn't need their forgiveness. She felt free. Free from their looks, from their judgments, from their contempt. She and Ryder stood in the middle of the square, surrounded by a crowd, but they felt as if they were alone. He calmly watched what was happening, his face as imperturbable as it had been on the day he arrived. People addressed him as a savior, but he always shifted the conversation to Ellie. "It's her hammer," he would say, "her strength. I was just a tool." These words, spoken in front of everyone, were worth more than any $1,000. They not only made her a hero, they made her a legend. The Harper family disappeared from the square like ghosts. Their defeat was so humiliating that they couldn't look people in the eye. Their power, built on fear and contempt, crumbled like a house of cards. Their place in the social hierarchy was taken by Ellie and Ryder. For the first time in a long time, Ellie felt not just accepted, but respected. It was a new, unfamiliar feeling, and it intoxicated her. By evening, when the celebratory hubbub had died down, they were left alone. Ryder found her in the forge. She was cleaning her new hammer, and it shone in the light of the setting sun like a real trophy. "You know," she said quietly, "I thought this victory would be the end. The end of all my suffering." "Victory is never the end," he replied, his voice deeper than usual. "Victory is just the beginning of a new life, for you, at least." They sat on a bench by the forge. The air was cool. The stars began to appear in the sky, like small, twinkling lights. Ellie wanted to know more about him. All she knew was that he was strong and just. She didn't know his name, his past, his purpose. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "You could have just walked past. You could have left." Ryder fell silent. He looked at the stars. "I've seen people like Clementine before," he finally said. "They're weak. And their weakness makes them cruel. They're afraid of strength because they don't understand it. They try to break another's spirit because their own spirit is empty. But you're different. You didn't hide your strength. You turned it into a tool. I couldn't just walk past. I was looking for something. I was looking for justice, and I found it in you." His words struck her. He spoke of her not as a woman who needed to be protected, but as a force worthy of respect. "What are you looking for?" she asked, and in her voice there was not just curiosity, but a desire to help. "I'm looking for a man." He paused, and his face became grim. "His name is Silas. He was my brother in arms. We served together, but he betrayed us. He took what was rightfully ours and ran away. He killed our commander to get it. It's not just money. It's the honor he never had." His words were like an icy rain. Ellie felt her world, which had just become sunny and joyful, suddenly become dark and dangerous again. She understood that Ryder was not just a kind stranger. He was a man with a dark past, a man who was being hunted. She felt fear, but it was a different kind of fear, not for herself, but for him. "Is he strong?" she asked. "This Silas, he's as strong as I am," Ryder replied. "But he has no honor. He uses his strength to destroy, not to create." The conversation was interrupted. The sound of hooves, loud, arrogant, full of impatience. It was not like the sound of a local's hooves. Ellie and Ryder stood up. A rider entered the town. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, dressed in black leather. His face was covered in dust, but it was clear that it was scarred. He didn't stop at the saloon. He didn't look for a place to rest. He rode straight ahead, his gaze, full of cold fury, darting over people's faces, looking for someone. His hand rested casually on the handle of his Colt. In his eyes there was no sympathy, no kindness, not even contempt, only a purer, ruthless intent. He stopped his horse right in the middle of the main street, and his eyes seemed to have found their target. He slowly dismounted. He was huge. His muscles were tense like steel cables. He was like a predator who had finally found his prey. "Ryder." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't used it for a long time. "I knew I'd find you. I knew your stupid, noble soul would make you stand up for someone. I knew you were too stupid to stay in the shadows." Ellie felt her blood run cold. This man was not just strong, he was dangerous. He was the embodiment of everything that Ryder was not. Ryder took a step forward, shielding Ellie with his body. "I'm here, Silas," Ryder said calmly. "Honor is not stupidity. It's something you will never understand." Silas laughed. His laugh was short, harsh, like the crackle of a dry branch. "Honor," he said, "they're just words. Money is real power. And I didn't just come for your life, brother. I also came for this woman. She's your weakness. I'll break her to get to you." His words were the last thing Ellie heard before she realized that her triumph was only temporary. She had just found her strength, but now that strength was threatened by a shadow that was much more dangerous than any contempt. She looked at Ryder, who stood in front of her, ready for a fight. His strength was not in a hammer, but in his will. And now the will had been challenged, a challenge that could cost him his life. Night fell on Dusty Creek, but for Ellie and Ryder, it brought no peace. Silas's words still echoed in their ears. "I'll break her to get to you." This threat was not just empty bravado. It was aimed directly at the heart of the strength that Ellie had just found. Yesterday she was a hero, and today a target. But she was no longer the scared girl who hid in the corner of the forge. She had found her strength, and now she was ready to defend it. They returned to the forge. Ryder told her everything. Silas was not just a comrade, he was like a brother with whom he had endured the hell of the Civil War. They were part of a secret unit that was supposed to guard important documents and gold belonging to a general. When the war ended, Silas betrayed them. He killed the others to take all the gold for himself. Ryder managed to escape, but he swore to find Silas and return what belonged to his fallen comrades. He told this to Ellie without emotion. His voice was even, but Ellie saw the pain in his eyes. It was the pain of a man who had lost faith in someone he considered a brother. "He's strong," Ryder said, his eyes fixed on the fire in the furnace. "His strength is like mine, but his mind, he's a predator. He won't fight by the rules. He'll use everything at his disposal." Ellie listened to him, and a plan was forming in her head. She couldn't fight Silas face to face, but she could give Ryder a weapon that would help him in this fight. Not just a weapon, but an advantage. She walked over to her anvil, on which her tools still lay. "We won't play by his rules." Her voice was full of determination. "We'll play by our own, and I'll give you what you need to defeat him." They worked all night. Ellie knew that brute force wouldn't help in a fight against Silas. Cunning was needed. She began to forge. She forged a thin, but incredibly strong steel plate that could be hidden in a sleeve. It wasn't armor, but rather an additional protection for the forearm that could parry a blow. But the most important thing was what she came up with for his gun. She knew that Silas would be expecting a regular Colt. Ellie forged a special part for the cylinder that would allow the weapon to be reloaded faster than Silas could do it himself. It was a small, inconspicuous advantage that could decide the outcome of the fight. And they worked on it all night. Ryder helped her. His hands, capable of bending metal, now worked with incredible precision and accuracy with her tools. Their bond became even stronger. They were not just a blacksmith and a warrior. They were a team. Her skill, her mind, her intuition, and his strength, his experience, his determination, all of it merged into one. At dawn, when the fog had just begun to clear over the streets of Dusty Creek, Silas appeared again. He didn't wait. He didn't hide. He just stood in the middle of the square, his hands on his holsters, his eyes fixed on Ellie's forge. He was so confident in his strength that he didn't even take hostages. He wanted Ryder to come out himself. Ellie came out of the forge. Her face was pale, but there was no fear in her eyes. Ryder followed her. He was calm. He was wearing the same clothes as yesterday, but underneath was the steel plate that Ellie had forged. In his eyes there was no hatred, only determination. Silas laughed. His laugh was as rough and harsh as the first time. "What? Little brother, brought your blacksmith girlfriend? She make a good hostage." "She's not a hostage," Ryder said calmly. "She's my partner. And her strength is not in weakness, but in the steel she can forge." The words were spoken, and the tension became almost unbearable. The townspeople, who had heard the news, began to peer out of their windows. They saw this scene and understood that something more than just a fight was unfolding before their eyes. It was a battle for honor, for justice, for the very soul of the town. "I won't play your games," Silas said, drawing his pistol. His movement was fast and deadly, but Ryder was ready. "And you won't have to," Ryder said, and his movement was just as fast. The shots rang out simultaneously. It was chaos. Two men whose strengths were equal engaged in a deadly dance, but Ryder was ready. He used the steel plate to parry a blow that could have been fatal. His movements were precise, calculated. He didn't shoot blindly, but at a target he had chosen in advance. Silas was shocked. He hadn't expected this. He had expected strength, but not intelligence. Their fight was long and brutal. They used every trick, every move they had once learned together. But Ryder had one advantage: the cunning that Ellie had given him. At the most critical moment, when Silas ran out of ammunition, he tried to reload his pistol, but Ryder was already ready. He drew his Colt, which, thanks to Ellie, was ready for the next shot. The last shot rang out. It was aimed not at Silas's body, but at his hand, which held the weapon. Silas howled in pain. His pistol flew out of his hand and fell into the dust. He was disarmed. He was not ready for this. Ryder walked up to him. His eyes were filled not with triumph, but with bitter sorrow. "You were my brother, Silas," he said. "I didn't want this. You're a fool," Silas rasped, his face contorted with pain and defeat. "I'm not defeated. You can't win. You don't know everything." At that moment, when Ryder was ready to end the fight, another shot rang out, but not from their weapons. It was aimed at Ryder's back. He fell. Ellie screamed. Jonathan Harper came out from around the corner. A pistol was in his hand, and a victorious smirk was on his face. He couldn't defeat them in a fair fight, but he could kill them like a coward. "Your friend is right, girl," Harper said, looking at Ellie. "You can't defeat me. You don't know what real power is." At that moment, Ellie realized that their victory was only temporary. She and Ryder had won one battle, but a new, much more dangerous war awaited them. A war where they had to fight not only for their honor, but also for their lives. Ryder lay on the ground, bleeding, and she stood alone, face to face with her old enemy. But this time there was no fear or humiliation in her eyes, only rage. A rage that could be stronger than any pistol. When Ryder fell, Dusty Creek froze. The sound of the shot split the silence, and it seemed that the very air became heavier. Ellie stood over him. Her world once again narrowed to a single point: the pistol in Jonathan Harper's hand. But this time there was no fear or humiliation in her eyes. They burned with rage. A rage that was hotter than any flame in her forge. Harper stood before her, his face distorted with triumph. He looked at the fallen Ryder with contempt, and at Ellie with cold satisfaction. "You see, girl," his voice was full of arrogance, "this is real power. Not those little toys of yours. I control everything, and I won't let some drifter and some blacksmith take what belongs to me." He didn't see her. He saw a symbol of his defeat that he was now ready to destroy. But he underestimated her. He thought she was just a woman who could be broken with words. But he didn't know that her heart was forged from the same metal as her hammer. "You don't control anything." Her voice was low and firm, like steel. "You're just a coward. You killed a man who was stronger than you, and you'll never be as strong as he is." Her words stunned him. He expected fear, pleading, but not such audacity. He took a step toward her, his finger on the trigger. "Shut up, Eleanor," he hissed. "I'll show you what real power is." But Ellie wasn't listening anymore. Her gaze swept over the forge. She knew every crack, every corner, every tool. She couldn't fight a pistol face to face, but she could use everything that was available to her. Her mind, her skill, and her knowledge of physics. She slowly backed away, luring him deeper into the forge. Harper followed her, his pistol aimed directly at her. He was confident in his victory. He was so confident that he didn't even notice Ellie take a small step to the side. "You think you can do something to me?" He laughed. "You're just a pathetic girl with dirty hands." Ellie didn't answer. She stood by the anvil that was the heart of her world. She knew every inch of it. She knew how to use its weight, its strength. When Harper came closer, she made her move. It was as fast as a hammer's strike. She grabbed a heavy steel rod that lay next to the anvil, and, using it as a lever, with incredible force, she hit the hammer that she and Ryder had forged together. The blow was so powerful that the hammer flew off the anvil and went directly toward Harper's hand. He was stunned. He hadn't expected this. The hammer hit his hand, and the pistol flew out of it, falling into the fire, where it hissed and went out. Harper howled with pain and rage. He was disarmed, and he was in her world. Ellie didn't hesitate. She ran to the fire, where a red-hot rod was burning in the hearth. She grabbed it with tongs. There was a cold fire in her eyes. She wasn't going to kill him, but she was going to teach him a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. "Your power is over." Her voice was like a steel scrape. "You lost. Not to Ryder, but to me. You lost to your own weakness. You thought power was a pistol, but power is will. It's faith. And you don't have it." She brought the red-hot rod to Harper's face, and he froze. There was a primal terror in his eyes. He was a man of the world. But now he was helpless, humiliated. Ellie didn't brand him. She just slowly moved the rod to the side and dropped it to the floor. It lay there, hissing and cooling, symbolizing the end of his power. The crowd that had been hiding behind doors and windows slowly came out into the street. They saw Ellie standing over Harper and Ryder lying on the ground, but alive. They saw that Harper, their king, had been defeated, and they understood who now ruled this town. Ellie rushed to Ryder. He was wounded, but not mortally. The bullet was lodged in the muscles of his shoulder, not hitting the bone. He was alive. She pressed his head to her chest, and the tears she had held back for so long finally flowed. They were tears not of despair, but of relief. He was alive. They had won. The events of this day became a legend. The police took Harper away. Silas, whom Ryder had wounded, disappeared, but Ryder knew that his mission was complete. He had returned what belonged to his comrades. He had found the justice he was looking for. Several weeks passed. Ryder recovered. Dusty Creek became a different town. People didn't just respect Ellie, they admired her. Her forge became the heart of the town. Men came to her not only for horseshoes, but also for advice. Women stopped talking about dresses and powder and became interested in her work. Clementine and her friends left the town, unable to bear the universal contempt. One evening Ryder came to Ellie. He stood at the entrance. His face was calm. He was ready to leave. His mission was complete. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said. "You helped me find what I was looking for." "And you helped me," she replied. "You helped me find myself." He nodded. Then he turned to leave. But Ellie stopped him. "Ryder," her voice was quiet, but full of determination. "I didn't just forge a hammer for you. I forged something else. For us." She held out a horseshoe to him. It was small, but perfectly forged, and their initials were engraved on it. "It's for luck," she said, "so you'll find your way." He took it and looked at it. Then he slowly shifted his gaze to her. He saw not just a strong woman, but a woman who had found her calling. He saw a home in her. He saw what he had been looking for his whole life. "I've already found my way," he said. His voice was deep and full of warmth. "It's right here, with me." He didn't leave. He stayed. He helped her expand the forge, and they began to work together. Her hands, full of calluses and soot, and his, steel and powerful, worked together, creating not just products, but something more. They were creating their own world, a world where strength was valued not for what it could destroy, but for what it could create. And in this world, full of dust and hot sun, they found their happiness.